Chapter 134. Not Without My Children, Part 3. Irshad and the Sudanese couple were released from the lockup after 24 hours. Their release came as a result of the intervention of Mustafa's uncle. The uncle convinced his nephew to drop the charges against his ex-wife and the Sudanese couple. As soon as Irshad was released, Mustafa and his uncle met her outside of the police station and offered her return ticket to her country. The uncle told her that the marriage relation between her and Mustafa was terminated due to the third divorce. According to the Sharia, she would not be able to live with Mustafa again. When Irshad demanded her children, she was told that the law in Saudi Arabia gives the husband the custody of the children. Irshad refused to accept the ticket and determined to fight for her children. She even threatened to take Mustafa to court if he refused to give her the children. Nevertheless, Mustafa and his uncle ignored her threats and left. Irshad did not give up and followed Mustafa to his house. At the apartment, Mustafa shut the door on her face and threatened to beat her if she continued knocking on his door. When Irshad ignored the warning of Mustafa, he assaulted her and began to beat her as if he was beating an animal. Some of the neighbors gathered around them and begged Mustafa to spare the life of his ex-wife. Nonetheless, the Saudi man ignored them and continued to beat the Australian woman until she fainted. The neighbors called the police when they concluded that Mustafa had killed Irshad. Nevertheless, Mustafa did not stop hammering the unconscious body of Irshad until the police arrived. That day, he was arrested under the charge of attempting to murder his ex-wife, whereas Irshad's unconscious body was rushed to the hospital. Miraculously, Irshad survived that vicious attack and brutal beating of her ex-husband. She was discharged from hospital on the next day. As soon as she left the hospital, she went to her Sudanese friends and told them about the assault of her ex-husband. Salwa and her husband invited her to stay in their apartment until the issue of her children was settled. Shortly after her recovery, Irshad lodged a complaint at the Sharia court and demanded the custody of her children. Her friends advised her not to go to Mustafa again. Meanwhile, Mustafa was set free on bail. Somehow the uncle was able to convince the police to drop the charge of murder attempt and cancel the file of Mustafa. After a couple of weeks, Irshad and Mustafa were invited to come and stand before Mu'allana, the judge of the Sharia court. In the Sharia court, no one was allowed to appoint a lawyer. In fact, the court would not permit any advocate to stand before its judge. What the court required for passing its judgment, which had been believed to be decided by God before the foundation of the universe, were the two disputing parties and nothing else. After a long wait, an old man dressed up like one of those people who go for pilgrimage or about to perform very important religious rituals entered the courtroom. He must be in his late 70s. He supported himself with a long walking cane. Everyone in the court was asked to stand and no one was allowed to sit until that old man occupied his judgment seat. He had no jury to consult or lawyers to confront. He was the sole arbitrator and no one else beside him. When he passed a sentence, his judgment was binding forever. No one had the power to revoke his judgment. He had never been to a law college and for that reason no one could call him a judge because he was higher than a judge. They call him Mu'allana, which means our spiritual master. The judge already knew that the Sharia would not permit the mother to obtain the custody of the children, but for formality he asked the Australian woman to tell the court why she wants to keep the children and do not want their father to have their custody. Irshad tried to prove to Mu'allana that her ex-husband was abusive, but all the proofs she supplied were refuted by Mu'allana himself. She used the genital mutilation of her daughter, but that reason was rejected on the ground that it was a required sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad to circumcise the girls. She referred to the second marriage of her ex-husband. She said she was told that only if there was a reason such as barrenness or sickness then the husband was allowed to marry a second woman beside his first wife. Mu'allana gave her a lecture on the importance of completing the sunnah of the Prophet by marrying more than one wife. Moreover, he told her that the wife of the Imam of the mosque in Australia taught her wrong thing by telling her that the husband is not allowed to marry a second wife unless there is a reason. As an example, Mu'allana said he had 4 wives at present and all 4 had children and healthy. Lastly, Irshad mentioned that Mustafa beats her often and even every now and then he kicks and slaps his children for reason or without reason. Mu'allana responded by saying that as a husband and father, Mustafa was permitted and encouraged by the Quran and the Prophet of Allah to beat his disobedient wife and rebellious children. In order to show that he was fair and disinterested judge, Mu'allana asked Mustafa to give him a reason that's stopping him from allowing his ex-wife to take his children to Australia for a visit. Mustafa said his wife was caught recently by the police while she was planning to flee out of Saudi Arabia along with his children. As a Muslim father, he told the judge that he did not want his children to grow up in a country like Australia where man and woman were living together in one bedroom without marriage and man was permitted to marry another man and woman another woman, alcohol was sold like grocery in the store and drugs as notebooks in schools. At the end of the day, the Sharia court ruled in favor of Mustafa and the custody of the children was entrusted into the care of their father. After the decision of the Sharia court, the Sudanese couple advised Irshad to accept her kismet in life and return to her country and start a new life. Nevertheless, Irshad said she would never leave her children and go back no matter what that might cost her. She decided to compromise with her ex-husband by asking him to take her back for the sake of their children. Her friend Salawa played an important role in trying to solve the difference between Irshad and her ex-husband. After a lot of meddling, Mustafa had agreed to take Irshad back to live with him but not as a wife. She was permitted to return to her former apartment and live as a mother to her children and a maidservant to Mustafa. For the sake of her children, the Australian girl agreed to return to the apartment of her abuser. Before she moved in, the Saudi man warned her that if she tried to fool him and play another game by kidnapping his children and run away, he would make her spend the rest of her life in prison. Irshad promised that she would never try that game again. Nevertheless, deep down in her heart she had not forsaken her desire to rescue her children from their abusive father and cruel society. For the time being, she decided to compromise until the right opportunity for their escape would arise. Irshad returned to her children and lived in a separate room. Mustafa knew that the Sharia law would not allow him to sleep with her because she was no more his wife. Accordingly, he never tried to rape her. Irshad felt great relief when she understood that her ex-husband was faithful to the laws of his religion. For a few days Irshad lived peacefully among her children. In spite of all that, the peaceful atmosphere was turned into hell when the uncle came to know that his nephew took his ex-wife back. The uncle was a very religious man and very strictly following his religion. He interpreted it as Mustafa was illegally cohabiting with a woman who was no more his wife. Wherefore, as soon as he came to know about it, he stormed the apartment in great rage and forced Mustafa to kick the white woman out. According to the uncle, if Mustafa wanted to take his ex-wife back, he should convince her to marry a muhalal, or legalizer. The uncle supported his objection by quoting the Quranic verse that says, "And if the husband divorces his wife for the 3rd time, she shall not remain his lawful wife after this absolute divorce, unless she marries another husband and the second husband divorces her. In that case there is no harm if the first couple remarry." Sayyid Abul Ala Maududi, The Meaning of the Quran, Volume 1, page 165, Surah Al-Baqarah 2, 230. Mustafa followed the advice of his uncle and brought a man who agreed to be the muhalal. When the neighbors saw the man, they knew he was just a muhalal. Irshad had never seen in all her life an ugly man as that one. He was short, black, and having a head as big as the rest of his body. His small eyes could hardly be seen. He was bald-headed and most probably in his late 50s. Mustafa made the deal with him and paid him a certain amount of money. Irshad contracted to him in marriage the same day he came to their apartment. According to the deal that he could sleep one day in the apartment and the next day he should divorce Irshad and leave. He slept by himself in a separate room. Irshad talked to him nicely and served him a dinner. Howbeit, the man broke his promise and refused to divorce Irshad. Mustafa threatened to kill him. The man lodged a complaint against Mustafa. The matter reached the Mu'allana of the Sharia court. Mu'allana said that even if the man agreed to divorce Irshad, still she could not go back to her husband. He quoted a hadith of the Prophet Muhammad in which he said the second husband should taste the honey of Irshad and she must taste his honey, which means they must have sexual intercourse together. In his book, Asbab al-Nuzul, page 46, Al-Suyuti states that a woman came to the Prophet Muhammad and told him, Abdul Rahman, the Muhallal whom she wed after she was divorced, has divorced me without having any sexual intercourse with me. May I go back to my ex-husband? Muhammad said to her, no, that is not permissible until Abdul Rahman has sex with you first, then you may go back to Rafa'a. When the man was pressurized by Mustafa and the uncle, he agreed to divorce Irshad with one condition, that she had to sleep with him even once. Mustafa and his uncle agreed for his condition. Irshad strongly refused to allow such a man to have sex with her. When Irshad refused to fulfill the condition, Mustafa and his uncle asked her to pack up her clothes and leave the apartment. Irshad knew that if she leaves she should never think of seeing her children again, because in Islam there was nothing called right of visitation. Wherefore, being forced by her circumstances and her love for her children, Irshad agreed to fulfill the condition of the Sharia law. She had never felt so much humiliated and degraded in all her life than when that man had sex with her. His body smelled like a decomposed body of a dead animal. His mouth produced a nasty odor of snuff and bad breath. It seemed that he had never brushed once his yellow-stained teeth. He fell on her body as an animal fell on the body of its resisting female. As soon as he attacked her body, she began to resist and push him away. He was such a strong man that she could not kick him off her body. Irshad regretted that she agreed to be locked in a room with such a beast man. She did everything she could to stop him from raping her. She scratched his face with her fingers' nails. She hit his body. She bit his cheeks and shoulders. She screamed as loud as she could, but no one came to rescue her. Before he emptied his filthiness inside her, she lost her consciousness. When she opened her eyes again, she found herself in a hospital. For the sake of her children, Irshad agreed to live with an abusive husband and allowed another man to rape her. But, she had never forgotten her plan of escaping. A few months passed since she was legalized through that man. After that, Mustafa accepted her as his wife. While Irshad was waiting for the right chance of escaping, her husband came up with a plan that shattered all her hopes. Without consulting her, Mustafa decided to join the Muslim Mujahideen in Afghanistan. That was the last place on earth that Irshad would like to go to. Mustafa did not give any convincing reason except that as a Muslim man he felt it was his duty to join the camps for training Muslims in Afghanistan. In fact, Mustafa, without the awareness of his wife, had begun long time ago to mix with young Saudi men who had great zeal for jihad. Through that group he came to know that there was a devout Saudi business tycoon by the name of Osama bin Laden who had established a base for jihad and began to call Muslims from all over the world to join his camps. In those camps the Mujahideen would be taught the true teachings of the Quran and Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad. They would also be provided with militarily training. The main objective of that group is to restore the Caliphate government to the Muslim world and to kick out the Americans and other Westerners from the Muslim countries. In order to fulfill that goal, the Mujahideen have to overthrow the current leaders of the Muslim countries who were agents to the West and replace them with devout Muslim leaders. When that aim is achieved through jihad or holy war, then the final goal is to appoint a supreme leader who is known in the Sharia law the Caliph. When the Caliph is chosen through shura, then all leaders of the Muslim countries would be called governors and would be under the authority and power of the Caliph. At that time all the political and geographical boundaries that the colonists created in order to divide Muslims into small countries would be abolished and there would be an Islamic empire. At present the greatest enemy of Islam is the imperialist country America and its allies from the Western countries. The leader of this group, Sheikh Osama bin Laden, issued fatwa against America and its allies. According to this fatwa, it's an obligation for the Mujahideen and all Muslims to declare jihad or holy war against the Americans. Wherever those infidels are found are to be killed, even shedding blood of their children is mubah or permissible. Any Muslim tries to protect those infidels or aids them against the mujahideen is infidel kafir, and therefore he supposed to be killed by the lions of jihad. Moreover, the fatwa justified the killing of the bystanders who happened to be there when the mujahideen carried out suicidal missions against the enemies of Islam and their agents from among the Muslims. Mustafa proved to Irshad beyond shadow of doubt that it was his religious obligation to join the camps of the mujahideen and carry jihad against the infidels and the enemies of Allah. In order to prove his stand, Mustafa used the following verses of the Quran and hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad. The Quranic authority for jihad against the infidels. Fighting is prescribed for you, and ye dislike it. But it is possible that ye dislike a thing which is good for you, and that ye love a thing which is bad for you. But Allah know it, and ye know not. 216. Say to the unbelievers, if now they desist from unbelief, their past would be forgiven them, but if they persist, the punishment of those before them is already a matter of warning for them. And fight them on until there is no more tumult or oppression, and there prevail justice and faith in Allah altogether and everywhere, but if they cease, verily Allah doth see all that they do. 38-39. O Prophet! Instigate the believers to the fight. If there are 20 amongst you, patient and persevering, they will vanquish 200, if 100, they will vanquish 1,000 of the unbelievers, for these are a people without understanding. For the present, Allah hath lightened your task, for He knoweth that there is a weak spot in you, but even so, if there are 100 of you, patient and persevering, they will vanquish 200, and if 1,000, they will vanquish 2,000, with the leave of Allah, for Allah is with those who patiently persevere. It is not fitting for a prophet that he should have prisoners of war until he hath thoroughly subdued the land, until he hath made slaughter in the land. Ye look for the temporal goods of this world, but Allah looketh to the hereafter, and Allah is exalted in might, wise. 65-67. But when the forbidden months are past, then fight and slay the pagans wherever ye find them, and seize them, beleaguer them, and lie in wait for them in every stratagem of war. But if they repent, and establish regular prayers and practice regular charity, then open the way for them, for Allah is oft forgiving, most merciful. 9:5. This verse is known as the verse of the sword and the mother of abrogators. Fight those who believe not in Allah nor the last day, nor hold that forbidden which hath been forbidden by Allah and His Messenger, nor acknowledge the religion of truth, of the people of the book, the Jews and Christians, until they pay the jizya with willing submission, and feel themselves subdued. 9:29. O ye who believe! Fight the unbelievers who are near to you and let them find firmness in you, and know that Allah is with those who fear Him. 9:123. Therefore, when ye meet the unbelievers, smite at their necks, at length, when ye have thoroughly subdued them, bind a bond firmly on them. Thereafter is the time for either generosity or ransom, until the war lays down its burdens. Thus are ye commanded, but if it had been Allah's will, He could certainly have exacted retribution from them, Himself, but He lets you fight, in order to test you, some with others. But those who are slain in the way of Allah, He will never let their deeds be lost. 47:4. The Hadith's authority for jihad against unbelievers. Allah's apostle said, I have been ordered, by Allah, to fight against the people until they testify that none has the right to be worshipped but Allah, and that Muhammad is Allah's apostle, and offer the prayers perfectly and give the obligatory charity. So if they perform that, then they save their lives and property from me except for Islamic laws, and then their reckoning, accounts, will be done by Allah. Sahih al-Bukhari. It is reported on the authority of Abu Hurairah that he heard the Messenger of Allah say, I have been commanded to fight against people, till they testify to the fact that there is no God but Allah, and believe in me, that I am the Messenger, from the Lord, and in all that I have brought. And when they do it, their blood and riches are guaranteed protection on my behalf except where it is justified by law, and their affairs rest with Allah. Sahih Muslim. The Prophet, peace be upon him, said, I am commanded to fight with men till they testify that there is no God but Allah, and that Muhammad is his servant and his apostle, face our Qibla, direction of prayer, eat what we slaughter, and pray like us. When they do that, their life and property are unlawful for us except what is due to them. They will have the same rights as the Muslims have, and have the same responsibilities as the Muslims have. Sunan Abu Dawud. A man came to the Prophet and asked, a man fights for war booty, another fights for fame and a third fights for showing off, which of them fights in Allah's cause? The Prophet said, he who fights that Allah's word, Islam, should be superior, fights in Allah's cause. Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. Allah's apostle said, Allah guarantees him who strives in his cause and whose motivation for going out is nothing but jihad in his cause and belief in his word, that he will admit him into paradise, if martyred, or bring him back to his dwelling place, whence he has come out, with what he gains of reward and booty. Sahih al-Bukhari. It has been narrated on the authority of Abu Hurairah who said, Allah has undertaken to provide for one who leaves his home, only, to fight for his cause and to affirm the truth of his word. Allah will either admit him to paradise or will bring him back home from where he had come out, with his reward and booty. Sahih Muslim. Allah's apostle said, know that paradise is under the shades of swords. Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. Narrated Abu Hurairah, Allah's apostle said, I have been made victorious through terror, and while I was sleeping, the keys of the treasures of the world were brought to me and put in my hand. Abu Hurairah added, Allah's apostle has left the world and now you, people, Muslims, are bringing out those treasures. Sahih al-Bukhari Volume 4, Book 52, Hadith number 220. The Prophet Muhammad said, I have been sent with the sword between my hands to ensure that no one but Allah is worshipped, Allah who put my livelihood under the shadow of my spear and who inflicts humiliation and scorn on those who disobey my orders. It has been reported on the authority of Jabir that a man said, Messenger of Allah, where shall I be if I am killed? He replied, in paradise. The man threw away the dates he had in his hand and fought until he was killed. Sahih Muslim. It has been narrated on the authority of Abu Hurairah that the Messenger of Allah, may peace be upon him, said, one who died but did not fight in the way of Allah nor did he express any desire, or determination, for jihad died the death of a hypocrite. Sahih Muslim. Fight everyone in the way of Allah and kill those who disbelieve in Allah. Ibn Ishaq, page 992. While Osama ibn Zayd, commander of Muhammad's army, was preparing his troops to commence the invasion of the Roman Empire and capture the lands of the Orthodox Christians, the Prophet Muhammad commanded him saying, attack them in the darkness of the dawn and fall on them killing and burn them with fire and invade them and return with the booty. Ibn Kathir in Al-Bidayah and Al-Nihaya page 139 and 143, Ibn Hisham page 245, and Al-Tabari in Tariq al-Rusul and Al-Mailuk page 156. Allah's apostle said, I have been made victorious through terror. Sahih al-Bukhari Book 52, Hadith number 220. Allah's apostle was asked, what is the best deed? He replied, to believe in Allah and his apostle Muhammad. The questioner then asked, what is the next best in goodness? He replied, to participate in jihad. Sahih al-Bukhari, Volume 1, Book 2, Hadith number 25. Allah's apostle said, there is no migration after the conquest of Mecca, but only for jihad. When you are called by the Muslim ruler for jihad fighting, you should go forth immediately, responding to the call. Sahih al-Bukhari, Volume 4, Book 52, Hadith number 311. Irshad being confronted with those undeniable verses and hadiths, she was left with two choices, either to leave her children and return to her country or back up her belongings and move along with her husband to Afghanistan. Irshad decided to accompany her husband to the Mujahideen's camps, but in her heart still she was planning secretly to flee with her children to Australia whenever she get the proper chance to do so. She wanted to contact the nearest Australian embassy and seek its help to rescue her and her children from the abuses that they were going through in the Muslim world. The family of Mustafa travelled to Afghanistan through Pakistan. It took them 1 week to reach those camps. As soon as the family arrived, they were registered as Mujahideen and allotted one small tent. Irshad anticipated that her children would not survive for 1 week in that primitive habitat. For her, even the nomadic Bedouin she saw in Saudi Arabia were living in better conditions than those Mujahideen. There were no toilets or places to take bath in those tents. Men and women go to the wilderness to answer the call of nature, whereas little boys and girls do it behind their tents. Consequently, there was nasty odor that was impossible to inhale without falling seriously sick. Flies were in millions by day and mosquitoes were in billions by night. Snakes and scorpions were common. There was no electricity or any kind of light except local lamps lit by kerosene. There was no any means of entertainment. Girls spent all the time in their tents because Taliban government shut down all female schools. Women had domestic chores duties only, cleaning, washing, and cooking by day and providing sexual pleasure by night, and every few months producing children. Almost every woman and girl was married. There was no minimum age required for marrying little girls, and therefore female children as small as 8 and 9 years old were given in marriage. Taliban government was still ruling the country when Irshad came with her husband and their little 4 children to stay in those Mujahideen camps. The Islamic government of Taliban closed all places of entertainment and prescribed severe punishment for anyone found having radio, television, or telephone. All girls' schools were shut down and the buildings were converted into mosques and Islamic schools for boys. Women were not allowed to step out of their houses even if they were sick. A woman could go out of her father's house to her husband's house when she got married or her grave when she died. In spite of all those restrictions on women, still the government required every female to wear the Islamic niqab or burqa inside their houses around the clock. In short, Taliban applied every verse of the Quran and every hadith of the Prophet Muhammad on women and returned with the Afghan society to the 7th century. Every woman found roaming on the streets without her husband or mahram would be given 40 lashes, and if she repeated it again her punishment would be doubled. Every woman slept with a man before marriage, both of them would be flogged 100 lashes, and in case one of them or both were already married to another person would be stoned to death. Circumcision of boys and girls was compulsory without exception. There were hundreds of rules for women, and for each one of them there was a corporeal punishment. All males were required by law to attend the Mujahideen military training from early in the morning until the sunset. During the training they were taught how to make bombs and how to carry out suicidal missions against the infidels and the hypocritical Muslims who were aiding them. The Mujahideen were also trained in how to assassinate Muslim leaders and top officials in the Muslim world. Every 100 Mujahideen were headed by an emir or prince. The Mujahid had to obey his emir without questioning, even if he asked him to assassinate his own father or mother. Refusing to fulfill the order of the emir would be considered an apostasy and treason, and the punishment was beheading. All Mujahideen had to count themselves as living martyrs who would be ready to die in the way of Allah or jihad any moment. The life in the Mujahideen camps was nothing short of living in hell. Every Mujahid would rather prefer to blow up himself and land into heaven to enjoy those 72 virgins of the Hur of paradise and rivers of wine than live in those miserable conditions. Wherefore, it is rather relief and joy for the Mujahid when he is commissioned into a suicidal mission. From this came the famous saying of Muslim terrorists that we love death and our enemies love life. Nevertheless, the women of Mujahideen had nothing to comfort them either in this life or hereafter. The Prophet Muhammad prophesied that the majority of Muslim women would land into hellfire. O women! Give alms, as I have seen that the majority of the dwellers of hellfire were you women. Sahih al-Bukhari, Volume 1, Hadith number 301. Irshad's life in Afghanistan was worse than what she went through in Saudi Arabia. Moreover, her chance of escape became impossible. She might dream of escaping from a maximum security prison in the West than from those concentration camps of the Mujahideen. Irshad, like any Mujahid's wife, was imprisoned within her small tent. She was not allowed to step out of her tent except with her husband. Married women were permitted to attend women gatherings where some elderly women taught them how to recite the Quran and what their duties as Muslim wives and mothers. Irshad was compelled by her husband to attend one of those gatherings. During the Quranic gathering she couldn't able to socialize with Afghani women because of language barrier. There were some Arab women, but she avoided to converse with them because they always made fun of her accent. For few months Irshad attended those women gatherings and learned a lot about the duties of women in Islam. Through those teachings she understood that she was deceived and presented with false teachings about women in Islam while she was in Australia. What the wife of the Imam of the mosque in Sydney told her about the rights of women in Islam was deception and false presentation. From those gatherings she was taught that as a woman she was inferior to man in intellect and religion, and this assertion was confirmed by hadith of the Prophet Muhammad in which he said to women, "I have not seen anyone more deficient in intelligence and religion than you. A cautious, sensible man can be led astray by some of you." The women asked, "O Allah's Apostle, what is deficient in our intelligence and religion?" He said, "Is not the evidence of two women equal to the witness of one man?" They replied in the affirmative. He said, "This is the deficiency of your intelligence. Isn't it true that a woman can neither pray nor fast during her menses?" The women replied in the affirmative. He said, "This is the deficiency in your religion." Sahih al-Bukhari, Hadith number 301 and 856. Irshad was also taught that as a woman she always caused a danger to the devout men. All the abusive practices on women which Muslims in Western countries try to hide and deny, Irshad found them to be true teachings of Islam and supported by verses from the Quran and authentic hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad. Wife beating, the Quran states, "And those you fear may be rebellious, nushas, admonish and beat them." Quran Surah Al-Nisa 4:34. Female genital mutilation or cutting. Aisha narrated an authentic hadith that the Prophet said, "When a man sits between the four parts, arms and legs of his wife, and the two circumcised parts meet, then ghusl is obligatory." Sahih Muslim, Hadith number 349. The Prophet Muhammad said, "Circumcision is a sunnah for men and a sign of respect for women." Hadith of Abu al-Mali, Abu Dawud. Child marriage. Such of your women as have passed the age of monthly courses, for them the prescribed period, if ye have any doubts, is 3 months, and for those who have no courses, it is the same for those who carry life within their wombs, their period is until they deliver their burdens, and for those who fear Allah, He will make their path easy. Quran Surah Al-Talaq 65:4. The Prophet wrote the marriage contract with Aisha while she was 6 years old and consummated his marriage with her while she was 9 years old, and she remained with him for 9 years, till his death. Sahih al-Bukhari Book 62, Hadith number 89. Polygamy, Quranic authority, marry of the women who seem good to you, 2 or 3 or 4, and if ye fear that ye cannot do justice to so many then one only, or the captives that your right hands possess. Quran Surah Al-Nisa 3:4. The compulsory hijab, niqab, or burqa. According to the Sharia law, Muslim women were not only to cover their heads and wear long clothes to cover their bodies, but they were not supposed to go out of their houses or be seen by men. The Prophet, peace be on him, told Salma and Maymuna, his wives, to veil themselves when Ibn Maktum entered. "But he is blind," they said. The Prophet, peace be on him, replied, "But are you blind, too? Do you not see him?" This hadith reported by Al-Tirmizi. The Quran also commands Muslim women to stay in their houses. "And stay in your houses, and make not a dazzling display, like that of the former times of ignorance. Be regular in prayer, and pay the poor due, and obey Allah and His Messenger. Allah's wish is but to remove uncleanness far from you, O folk of the household, and cleanse you with a thorough cleansing." Al-Ahzab 33:33. Women used to roam about without cloaks, jilbabs, and men used to see their faces and hands, but when the verse stating, O Prophet, tell your wives and your daughters and the women of the believers to draw their cloaks over themselves. Surah Al-Ahzab verse number 59, was revealed, then this was prohibited and women were ordered to wear the jilbab. Then Ibn Taymiyyah goes on to say, the word jilbab means a sheet which Ibn Masud explained as a cloak covering the entire body including the head, face, and hands. Therefore, it is not permissible for the women to reveal the face and hands in public. Ibn Taymiyyah's book on Fatwas volume number 2, page number 110, and also in the book Hijab page 15. The Prophet Muhammad asked his daughter Fatima, what Allah requires from the woman? She said, she should neither see a man nor be seen by him. The Prophet embraced his daughter and said, blessed posterity from blessed posterity. Eventually, Irshad understood that Islam wants the woman to remain imprisoned within the four corners of her house so that she shouldn't be seen by any man except her master the husband. Even her father and brothers are not supposed to see her without her burqa. To ensure total segregation between females and males, Muslim house has two separate sections, female section and male section. Those two sections are divided by a wall as high as the Berlin Wall and as long as the Wall of China. Each section has its own door, washroom, and rooms. In addition to these, the female partition has a kitchen. It is a big shame and totally and completely forbidden for a man to cook his food and wash his clothes. These chores are women's duties. The Muslim woman is a cook, a cleaner, a sex slave, a washerwoman, and prisoner. She is abused through female genital mutilation, child marriage, wife beating, rape, honor killing, polygamy, body covering, arbitrary divorce, inability to divorce, lack of child custody, etc., etc., etc.